I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is we only have one session left of the CPO Festival. The good news is that it's starting right now. This is the last chance to get your questions answered, so be sure to get them submitted. Let's finish with a bang.
So, you want to change the world. Build something that makes people go, problem is, you'll be flying blind. You build product on one end, results come out the other, but in between is a massive black hole. That's why we built Amplitude. It gives you a whole new understanding of customer behavior, predicts outcomes, and adapts experiences to drive world-changing results. You want to change the world? Now you can.
Hello and welcome back, everybody. Welcome if you're joining us for the first time. I do hope you are well, and it's great to have you with us at the CPO Festival. That's right, we are now into our final session, but it's one that we have been looking forward to. I think this is going to be really, really valuable. So you have done well to choose this one. I'm sure you'll get a lot from it. Just before we get into the session, quick reminder, you can join our Slack community that's got 7,500 other product pros on there, or follow us on LinkedIn. There's 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, but you can go to productledalliance.com. You'll find jumping off points to both Slack and LinkedIn from there, as well as lots of content, memberships, courses, reports, white papers, lots and lots of useful stuff for you to take away and digest. Make sure to check that out. Now, we are going to go straight into this session. So I'm going to invite our speaker to join me on camera. And while she does, I will briefly introduce her. So we are lucky to be joined by Andrea Wang from Amplitude. And Andrea is going to be talking to us about how to structure a growth team. So without any further ado, I will hand straight over. We will have questions for time at the end. So just drop your questions into the chat box and we will tackle them towards the end of the session. But without any further ado, Andrea, over to you.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me here today. And hi, everyone. Very excited to be here today and chat about how to structure a growth team. This is a topic I care deeply about because 3 years ago, I joined Amplitude, and my role was to start out the first product growth team at Amplitude. But at the time, I quickly realized there is so little literature out there about how you're supposed to do this, how to think about where this team should sit in an organization, and how to build out the team. What should this team initially focus? And as the team scales, where do you hire the best growth people out there? So today, very excited to share some of my personal experience with scaling out the growth team at Amplitude. But in order to prepare for this presentation, I also consulted a couple of top growth professionals that I know that have scaled hyper-growth companies in both consumer and enterprise space, such as Airtable, Eventbrite, Pinterest. And I'll be sharing some of the key learnings from structuring a growth team at those companies as well. So just a little bit about my background. I have been at Amplitude for the last 3 years. And before that, I was at Lime from Series A to D, so had some experience in consumer marketplace. And I was also a management consultant at Kearney and investment banker at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Also an active angel investor and advisor in pre-seed and seed stage consumer and enterprise startups. So today I'm going to share, first of all, level set on what a growth team does, because believe it or not, even though growth is such a commonplace function, it's still a very emerging domain. So I want to level set on what is the job of a growth team. And then we'll be talking about when you actually need a growth team, because there is such a thing as spinning up a growth team too early or maybe too late in your company's growth trajectory. I will be spending most of my time talking about growth team structure and org design, and I'll be sharing some concrete examples of companies out there and share the pros and cons of different structures that you normally see. And finally, we'll be talking about how you can find the best growth talent. So first of all, what does a growth team do? Casey Winters is the former CPO of Eventbrite and the first product lead at Pinterest for their growth team. He has a great definition and articulation of what is the core job of a growth team. He said, most product teams are built to create or improve the core value provided to customers. Growth is connecting more people to the existing value. What's important here is that growth teams don't tend to build net new features. That's the job of the core product teams. However, the growth team's mission is incredibly important. It is to distribute the existing value of your product to as many potential customers as possible and removing all friction along the way to help them experience the value as easily and quickly as possible. How it manifests inside an organization like Amplitude is we define our growth team's charter as building predictable, sustainable, and competitively defensible distribution strategy for Amplitude. The way we think about our mission is this team's goal is to drive long-term sustainable growth for Amplitude. So while you might think of a growth team as helping a company achieve your short-term revenue growth or user growth targets, this is a team that should be also thinking about really long-term about what are the foundations, building blocks that this team should be starting to working on so that it can make sure the business long-term grows as sustainably and competitively as possible. So let's also chat about how a growth team functions, because that's also fundamentally very different from how a core product team or a traditional marketing team functions. This is a framework from Reforge, a professional development program for growth and product professionals. And it lays out 3 fundamental ways that a growth team operates that might be different from some of the other teams. First of all, a growth team should be laying out the growth model for a business. So both quantitatively and qualitatively thinking about how your business is acquiring, retaining, and monetizing customers. By doing this, you should have a fundamental view of what are the most important levers in your company that drives your growth, whether you are a product-led, marketing-led, and sales-led organization. And this is incredibly important for a growth team because this is how this team can identify what are the biggest points of leverage and needles that they should be investing time into moving to move the business forward. And secondly, the growth team should be an expert on user psychology. So even though it's a very data-driven analytical team, this team should deeply understand the customer's personas and pain points so that they can brainstorm the type of initiatives that will move the needle on driving growth. And then finally, this is a team that often leverages hypotheses-driven experimentation to test different hypotheses, validate them, and have quantifiable impact on some of your key metrics. So now that you have a good foundation on what a growth team is supposed to do inside your company, since many of you are senior product executives in a lot of different companies, one of the first questions that might come to mind when you're thinking about dedicating more resource to a growth team is, what should this team be working on? So I asked many of the growth practitioners about what is the early focus of their growth team when it just got started. And there actually is a surprising amount of convergence in terms of the initial area of focus that the first growth team tends to focus on. And they tend to start with acquisition and activation problems. For example, at Amplitude, our first growth team started with working on growth traffic. Essentially, the KPI is to drive net new signups to our free product. And this team worked a lot on web conversion, working on a startup scholarship program to attract more SMBs early on with a freemium motion. At Lyft, their growth team initially focused on paid acquisition, so on the acquisition side, but they also were starting to improve driver onboarding to improve activation of new drivers. At Patreon, their first growth team started with creator onboarding. And at Eventbrite, their growth team was focused on event creator growth at the very beginning. So this seems to be a common trend among all the growth teams that I have chatted with in terms of where they started. But you might be wondering why, because there are also other growth problems to tackle, such as monetization and retention engagement. My personal take is that the reason why growth teams don't tend to start by tackling retention is if your product is experiencing a severe retention problem, that is probably a signal that there is some issue with product market fit. Or there is some issue with mismatch of who you're acquiring top of funnel and the core value prop that is being delivered with your core product. So if your product hasn't even reached product market fit yet, the typical advice that we would give is it is too early to deploy a growth team to tackle that problem. You might be better off spending more core product development resources to make sure that you build a solid core product experience that actually has product market fit. And the reason why growth teams don't tend to start with monetization problem is that you need to have a large enough user base so that your monetization efforts can yield the most impact. So in terms of long-term ROI, it's a logical sequencing to focus on acquisition and activation first to make sure that you grow your entire user base and that you don't have a severe activation issue. And then later on, layer in some monetization improvements so that those efforts can have the highest ROI. So then let's talk about when you might need a growth team. Out of 100 companies that I might see on the market today, I think only a minority of them have already established a growth team. And yet a lot of the early stage founders I talk to, even the ones that are still in the seed or Series A stage, are already starting to think about hiring a head of growth or a dedicated growth team. So when is the right time for a company to start thinking about establishing a dedicated team focusing on growth? Lauren, the head of growth at Airtable, has a great take on this topic. She said that many companies want to establish a growth team too early. Growth teams should scale product market fit. When you're first launching, you could have a growth hire to drive acquisition, signups, SEO. You may be making one hire to seed initial buyer loops. And when you want to establish a team, you should already have figured out a loop. So you should start with one team to figure out where the loops are. The most critical takeaway here is that a growth team should come in after a company has already found product market fit. And that is why usually my typical advice to seed stage founders is that when you're not even sure you have product market fit yet, it's probably a little bit too early to thinking about having a dedicated team focusing on growth. Another important takeaway from this is that it's really important to figure out the levers of your growth before you deploy a team against it. So there is some foundational understanding of the business that the existing team should already have done so that you know what type of talent you need. This leads to Elena's advice. Elena's interim VP of Growth at Amplitude and former CMO at Miro and SVP of Growth at SurveyMonkey. She advises that companies should have a basic view of their growth model before you decide to hire a growth team so that you can hire the right type of talent. And what she means by that is you need to make sure you have a good understanding of whether you are a product-led, marketing-led, or a sales-led company. Because it's not the right match if you are a very marketing or sales-led organization, and yet you bring on someone with a growth product management background because their background and competency is not the right fit in terms of the predominant growth motion of your business. And furthermore, in order to establish this growth model, you need to have some foundational data to be able to analyze your different growth levers. So investing very early in your growth and data infrastructure is really important so that you can have that understanding as early as possible and get ready for a growth team to come in and actually re-examine your growth and accelerate that growth. Next, let's talk about the meat of this presentation, which is how do you actually approach structuring a growth team? So at this point, hopefully you have already thought through growth is really important to the company. We've already figured out our go-to-market motion and have a clear point of view on how we grow as a business. And there is buy-in from the executive and leadership level to invest further in growth. So next, the question comes, where should this team sit and how should we approach the org design so that this team can have the maximal amount of impact? So I'm going to walk you through several common archetypes of org designs that I've seen across different companies and also discuss the pros and cons of each structure because no structure is perfect. The first org structure that is typically seen is a centralized growth org where you have a growth executive, could take the title of VP of Growth or a Chief Growth Officer who reports directly into the CEO. And that person sits in parallel with your Chief Product Officer, Chief Marketing Officer, and CTO. So in this model, you would have people working on growth, especially in those business functions, such as growth marketing, growth product, and growth analytics, reporting into this growth executive. Typically, even in the centralized growth organization, growth engineering still reports into CTO. It's less common to see growth engineering reporting into a VP of growth. But actually, at Dropbox, at some point, growth engineering reported into VP of growth because that growth executive came from an engineering leadership background. So a lot of the nuance also comes from what type of competency and background does your growth talent have within the organization that would guide some of the placement of specific functions inside the company. When we think about the pros and cons of this structure, as you can imagine, when you put cross-functional talent that is all working on growth and driving the same set of metrics and OKRs under the same executive, it can help significantly with cross-functional alignment and velocity. Because this growth executive is usually empowered and entrusted with independent decision-making. There might be less dependency with adjacent departments and executives, and also having a very senior executive sponsor can help address a lot of the cross-functional dependencies and alignment more easily. But the con of this structure is that while you may have velocity and this team might be able to make changes really fast, they might not have as much interaction with the rest of their function and department as they otherwise would. So you might encounter another issue of this growth mindset is kind of isolated to this independent growth team, but the rest of your product team and marketing team, because they don't have a very day-to-day interaction with the growth team, they might not benefit from learning about the way this team works, how to approach experimentation. So there could be a dissemination of growth mindset issue. And when companies are not satisfied with this model, usually they would consider an alternative model, which is a growth tribe model. And in this model, you would have people working on growth roll up to their respective functions. So growth product team reports into VP of product, growth marketing reports into VP of marketing, etc. So Pinterest is one of the companies that pioneered this kind of growth tribe structure. And it has worked really well for them. And the reason why it works well is that you benefit from this growth mindset culture in the organization, because these growth PMs often interact with other PMs in the organization. And there might be benefits with hiring, because a lot of product managers, even if they focus on growth, they still want to report into the executive whom they see themselves become in the future. Instead of being siloed and reporting into a different org that sometimes may make them feel that they're very isolated from the rest of the company. However, there's also a con with this structure, which is the pro of the original of the first centralized growth org structure that I just talked about. It's velocity. So in this world, when you have different growth talent reporting into their own functions, there is no there's no single executive responsible for growth. And every single time this cross-functional group of people want to shape some changes, they tend to need to align a lot more with their core product team peers or other marketing teams to make sure that there is alignment. So one of the cons of this structure is definitely velocity. So those two are two of the most common structures that we've seen, but there are also a lot of different variants based on those two foundational structures that you might typically see out there. For example, one slight variant from the growth tribe structure is when a CPO or your CMO who runs both growth product and marketing functions. Examples of this is Imperfect Foods. So Adam Fishman was the Chief Product and Growth Officer at Imperfect Foods. And at one point, both the growth marketing and growth product team rolled up to him, although it later shifted and growth marketing kind of separated out and reported back into the CMO. But the reason why it worked for him at the time was he is the type of growth practitioner who had both growth product management and growth marketing background, which is not common at all. So again, in this scenario, when you have an executive who has competencies across multiple domains, it makes it possible for a single executive to kind of cross over and manage multiple functions that oftentimes you would see roll up to separate functions. And there's a fourth structure that you can see at companies at Amplitude and Airtable. And this is when the chief product officer runs growth product design and analytics, sometimes growth marketing, but those three are the common functions that could roll up to the CPO. The reason why, for example, Amplitude decided to adopt this particular org structure is our CPO has always been the primary executive championing growth at Amplitude. So the first growth team that was spun up was a growth product team, and that sat under product, even though the team's charter and mission was very much on acquisition side, and the scope of the changes were primarily on the marketing website. And over time, as this team scaled, as we added additional analysts supporting growth, it made sense for all of those different functions to live within the product organization. At one point, growth marketing even rolled up to the CPO, but now we decided to move growth marketing out of product and report back into the CMO because the company wanted to optimize for disseminating that growth mindset throughout their organization. So this change in org design was optimized towards that, making sure the rest of the marketing org also benefit from the growth mindset and culture. So as you can see, the type of variations you could have with structuring a growth team is infinite. And a lot of times the reason why there are so many different nuances with how you could be structuring an organization really comes down to the unique circumstances of your growth model, your business model, and also what type of talent you have. Depends on that person's background, competency, and the type of person you want to bring on. But fundamentally, the rule of thumb here is the right team structure depends on an understanding of your growth model. And a lot of times it could vary based on the competency of the growth leader that you already have in your company, or someone you want to bring in inside a company. So lastly, let's talk about growth hiring. Now that you're committed to hiring for growth, but the challenge is not done because growth hiring is extremely hard. When you think about growth as a function, it has only existed for about a decade. So the number of people out there who have been there and done that and know how to do growth is few and far in between. And that makes growth hiring extremely competitive and difficult. So let's first talk about, let's assume you're early in your growth journey and you don't have anybody dedicated to growth at that point. How should you think about hiring for the first person who is dedicated to thinking about growth? I love this advice from Casey Winters. And he mentioned that you shouldn't hire someone for the first growth hire. Someone internal should do it who already has context on your business. And there's no head of growth that's going to join a company if no one is currently working on growth already, because they want to see that you already invested in it, to know that you treat it seriously. And that's the biggest mistake that he sees companies make with making their first growth hire. And his sentiment is actually echoed by almost everyone I have spoken with at other companies too, because when you're just starting out on your growth journey, you actually need to have someone who already knows the business, who has the trust and credibility within an organization, because growth sometimes is a brand new culture and a new way of working. So sometimes internal talent works best because that person already has solid relationships across the company, Whereas an outside executive who has been there and done that, although they may have experiences with other types of products and business models, those learnings and frameworks don't always apply to your company's product. But the question is, how do you identify this internal talent who could be a great fit to start leading your growth efforts? This is how I would recommend companies think about, because growth is such a cross-functional domain. And there's so many adjacent functions that actually prepare someone well to get started in growth. And there are certain key personality traits that I always look for as a hiring manager to identify high potential growth talent. So in terms of function, actually someone who came from product management, data engineering, marketing, biz ops, sales could all be a great fit, because they would have part of the competency already that is required for someone to succeed in this domain. And some of the key personality traits that I look for is whether someone have the type of growth mindset to learn really fast. Growth, even though might be a brand new domain for them, they're willing to roll up their sleeves, learn by doing, and also seek outside resources to learn about some of the case studies and frameworks. And they're hungry and competitive. So sometimes I find that people coming from military and someone who was a former athlete could be a great fit for growth. And being data-driven and having great analytic skills is super important. And this needs to be someone who cares about having quantifiable business impact. So sometimes people coming from management consulting and investment banking background might be a good fit. But if you conclude after searching internally that you simply cannot find someone internally to do the job, you might come to the point where you have to hire externally. And some of the resources that I would recommend, number one is Reforge. As mentioned before, it's a very solid network of top growth practitioners in the industry. So in their community, you can find up and coming growth PMs who are rising in their career and exhibit tremendous growth mindset simply from the fact that they enrolled in this program, or ERRs who have been executives at companies before that you can chat with and hire. And also, this is such a small, close-knit industry. Once you get to know a single growth leader that you deeply admire, even if that person doesn't join your company, the chances are that person is connected to or already knows a lot of people similar with them that you can network with as well. So definitely leverage the private growth leader network because this is a very small circle and everyone kind of knows each other. So today went through a ton of content that each topic on its own would be worth its separate presentation. So if you have further questions or want to simply connect and chat about growth, here's my contact info, and we'll be open to any question that you might have.
Great, thank you, Andrea. That was really, really interesting, and I think you're right. You could do a presentation on several of those topics in themselves. So no, thank you for taking the time. And we are almost out of time, but we've got a couple of minutes. So if you do have questions, drop them into the public chat, and I will go through as many as possible. While you're doing that, I wanted to ask a question. You were talking about kind of converting someone internally within the company into a growth role. How should that person go about learning how to actually do growth without a leader who already knows how to do it? How would you recommend they go about learning that skill?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I actually went through that exact same journey. When I first joined Amplitude, I basically had to do that. And the way I approached it was I simply researched what are some of the outside resources and professional development programs that I can take advantage of, so that I quickly get up to speed on different growth frameworks, case studies, and get to meet other high caliber growth practitioners that I can learn from. That's how I encountered Reforge. So pretty much did 5 cohorts over the last 2 years where I learned about different growth concepts and frameworks around acquisition, activation, retention, engagement, monetization, and pricing within a very short amount of time. So that's number one. Number two is just learn by doing. I think typically when this person is hired, there is a problem that is identified by the leadership that needs to be solved. So simply being extremely scrappy and creative and working cross-functionally to figure out what are the different ways we could tackle this problem, shipping some experiments to see what works and what doesn't. I think that entire process, I think if we're talking about someone who has a lot of like learning mindset, typically that person can figure out and learn from there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really good advice. And I think, like you say, go external and support them as an organization, support them in doing that. We've got one question which came through, how to know when the time has come to put a growth team in place. I know you had a little section on that, but perhaps you could elaborate maybe the one key sign that you might be at that tipping point, maybe.
Yeah, so number one is you have to have a product market fit. So in terms of company stage, after Series A is usually the minimum amount of time you need. The second signal is if you are observing that your growth is weaker than you expected, and even though like the growth is a responsibility that should be on every single person within a company, if you're observing that your core product managers or marketers are not shipping changes to have enough focus on metrics and iterating at a velocity that you would like to see, that to me is a signal that having more dedicated resourcing and maybe a team to start thinking about driving your growth, starting from one part of the journey, and taking that really high velocity iterative development approach could be a good time. So it really depends on your assessment of your current state of your growth. If your growth is off the charts and you don't even need to do anything to drive it, you could still get incremental benefit from having a growth team. It just depends on what type of velocity and focus you want to have in the company.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you very much. We are a couple of minutes over, and so I'll have to end us there. But I didn't want to interrupt because I thought the presentation was really, really good. So thank you again for taking the time. It's really, really appreciated. And thank you to Amplitude as well for sponsoring the event and helping us all get together.
Thanks, Al. Really enjoyed it as well.
Great, thank you. And thank you to all the attendees as well. So it's been great to have you join us this today, whether it's the afternoon now, the evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's been great to have you all with us for the CPO Festival. We are getting together in London in a few weeks' time, December 1st. So hopefully we may see some of you there. Remember to check out productledalliance.com. There's loads of information on how to join our Slack community, how to come and meet us in London in person, plus loads of content, white papers, reports, courses, loads of useful stuff on there. So to be sure to check that out. All that's left for me to say is thank you once again.
Unfortunately, that brings us to an end of the CPO Festival. Once again, we want to take a moment to thank every person who's contributed to making this festival a worthy addition to our product leadership calendar. Sponsors, partners, speakers, and of course, every one of you that has tuned in. But the fun doesn't end there, so be sure to check out theproductledalliance.com for lots more content, events, courses, and access to our free Slack community with over 7,000 product pros, as well as our membership options. We hope to see you again soon.